Hey, it's Brett here. I'm going to give you guys a quick lesson on ice, which is an ice pack here, and heat. I don't have a heating pad because I don't like heat. So anyways, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, we get a lot of questions in regards to when to use ice, when to use heat with injuries. So there's a few factors that go into this. Factor number one is what was injured in regards to the problem, like if it's a deep condition versus something more superficial. On something like that, does ice affect it? If it's more superficial, it's a lot easier for that ice to work. Heat would never really be used in either of those circumstances when that injury first happens. The duration of the injury, in other words, if the injury happened 4 weeks ago, ice is still going to be something that works if you have inflammation. Heat in some cases can loosen the muscle belly up itself, loosen the soft tissue up, so allow you to work some of the rehabilitative things you're doing. Very short duration of time for the heat though in that circumstance. The biggest thing I look at with this is that you got to understand the mechanism of these two things. Ice constricts the vessels in that area where that injury. If I hurt my elbow and I put ice on there, it constricts the vessels that supply blood to that area, so it helps to decrease the amount of inflammation or that inflammatory response that you have on there. Inflammation is good short term because that's what allows the tissue to heal. Long term, breaks more tissue down, causes more of a long-term chronic injury with that, so we want to minimize it, hence the reason we use ice. Heat, if I put heat on that elbow, yes, it feels good because it's warm. Warmth is something your brain recognizes as something that it likes. That's why people like to heat things. Heat on that area brings more blood to the area, chews up that other soft tissue in the area. You can actually end up with a more chronic, more long-term, more permanent injury at that point in time. That's why we want to stay away from it unless, like if you're going to go out and perform an activity, a little bit of heat on that spot can loosen it up a little bit. But this is, I'm talking 4 weeks down the road, that 21, 28, 30 days down the road where you would ever even consider something like that. In my book, in most cases, I will never recommend heat for somebody. So just take that down on there. The other piece to understand with ice and heat is the duration at which you use it. Like I said, heat, 5 minutes tops on something like that. Ice, on the other end of it, same thing. I don't want somebody sleeping on an ice bag all night long when they hurt their back. Even for that matter, I don't want somebody on it for half an hour to an hour type of thing. Ice, like an ice pack to the body with like a towel in between, 10 to 20 minutes tops on something like that. That's all you need. You can get off it for an hour and get back on it, get off for an hour, get back on it. That's the most you're ever going to want to use it. If you're going to use a direct contact, like for example, I'm going to use like tennis elbow as an injury here. So it's a very acute spot that's very superficial. In other words, it's very outwardly towards the skin. You can put a couple ice cubes in a plastic sack, put those directly on there for about 5 minutes is all you need. Or if you're using an ice bath, like you roll an ankle, you got a bucket of water, you put ice in there. It is going to feel awful when you put it in there, but you get through 5 minutes of that, it's going to numb it out, and really that's all you need in a circumstance because of how direct contact you have on there. You don't need 10 minutes, you don't need 15 minutes, you don't need 20 minutes on there. Short duration with that. It's the repetitiveness of the icing that helps the problem. So rather than doing ice for an hour in a day, ice it for 10 minutes, 6 times a day type of thing. It's extreme even in that circumstance, but you get my point with that. So hopefully you get a better idea of ice versus heat. In an acute circumstance, if I go out and I injure my knee right now type of thing, I'm going to ice that thing as soon as possible because I want to minimize that quick acute inflammatory process. I need inflammation for it to heal. I just don't want it in a big burst, and I don't want it over a long duration of time. That's why ice works on that. Heat, right away, you're like, oh, my knee's tight. You put heat on it, it feels good for the next hour, and it tightens right back up on there because you introduce more blood to the area. You actually increase the inflammatory response. That's why we want to stay away from that as much as possible on there. And like I said, unless the condition is really, really chronic, that is the only time I'm using heat on something like that. And even in that circumstance, most of the time if I'm going to use heat and loosen it up, I'm going to perform an activity. What do I want to do right after it? I want to put some ice back on it right after that so I keep that inflammatory response with that chronic injury to a bare minimum. So if you got any questions, feel free to reach out. I hope this helps.